stream the meeting. Beep, 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 beep. Is that us or them? Who's speaking? We are live. Amazing. And good evening, Redmond, Washington. Hey, can we get a camera to pan around there just once, like fast enough so people don't have to be embarrassed? But it's like a really, really good turnout. All right, let's hear it for everyone not here on the internet. And I don't know where, is there a place for me to see how many people are here on the internet, or is that reserved for?
There should be, if you scroll down a little bit.
It says there is one person here. Yay! It also says the content of this meeting is being sent to a third party. Is this the first party? Where's the second party, and who invited the third party? I'm going to say got it, because I don't seem to have a choice other than that or leave meeting. All right. And okay, now we see some people online saying hello. Hello, Melissa and Eliana. And if you guys tell me where you're from, I see Stacy has signed up all the way from Woodinville. Okay, couldn't get in the car and get out tonight, huh? And Southern California, Allegheny, but can't do it. Okay, so we apparently are live. It reminds me of the cartoon that I saw that when I was a kid, I had no idea how complicated it was going to get. And this cartoon was a little girl, maybe 5 or 6 years old, walking down the street, holding the hand of her father. And this was at the time, the big technological breakthrough was the consumer version of studio audio tapes. And the big company at that time in making tapes was Memorex. And their mass consumer market was, their slogan was, is it alive? Or is it live, or is it Memorex? Anybody remember that? And this little girl's walking down the street holding the hand of her dad, and she says, Dad, are we live or Memorex? Now, as some of you know, I mentioned that I was at the Conscious Life Expo in Los Angeles about 3 weeks ago, I guess. And it was an extraordinary event. It was the 22nd year. It was my 3rd year there as a speaker. But there were well over 10,000 people at that. I don't have a final number. I know that some of you were there. It was lovely to see you, and some of you out there in Cyberland were there also. It was fun to meet a bunch of people. But one of the panels that I was on was the George Norrie Forum. And George Norrie, for those of you who don't know, was the inheritor of the old Art Bell Coast to Coast show. He's a regular on Gaia.com, Gaia TV. And I was the only astrologer. I was the token astrologer on this panel with ET researchers and history revisionists and numerologists and past life regressionists and a couple.
They can't hear you in the back.
Who can't hear me in the back? How about now? Is that any better? Well, that's awful. I mean, that's awful that I have to like really eat the microphone. But I always thought that was just a saying. But apparently. All right. So.
Can you change the Zoom mic settings? It's on your laptop right now.
Change, yes. All right, technological delay here for just a moment. Let's see where we go here. We go Zoom meeting and HDMI USB capture.
Yeah.
And now we should be better.
Yeah.
Okay, and we're not going to start all over again for all of you out there in Cyberland, but welcome, and here we are live. I think everything is working now. And so at the Conscious Life Expo, I sat on this panel, and it was a packed room. There were probably close to 400 people stuffed in that room. And I was sitting next to a man named Riz Virk, an Indian man, and a technologist, and someone who has a book on the bestseller list right now, which is basically a book about the question is, do we live in a simulated reality? In other words, are we live or are we Memorex? And so this old cartoon has taken on new meaning because there really is real consideration as we move further along into this blast into the future that we are now experiencing as Pluto has stepped its toes just one notch deeper into quantum pond, into Aquarius, that is. As we know, Pluto is the slowest moving of all the observable planets, and we don't care what astronomers call a planet or not. We astrologers use the word planet in the true meaning of the word, which the Greeks coined. It was planeta, and planeta it's translated as wanderer. Anything that moved through the sky that appeared to wander was a planet. And we astrologers refer to the sun and moon as planets. It's not because we're stupid. It's because we're using an older meaning of the word. And quite frankly, when Pluto was demoted from a planet to a minor planet or a Oort belt object or a planetoid or whatever, not only didn't Pluto give a damn, and that damn word is important, I'm going to come back to it in a moment, Pluto loved it. Why? Because Pluto is the lord of the underworld. Pluto represents archetypally everything that doesn't appear on the surface. Everything that's out of sight, out of mind is Plutonic. It's under the world. And in fact, Pluto also has to do with immense wealth, because in ancient times, having a lot of money didn't make you wealthy. Hey, can we keep it down there just in the back a little bit? Just a little bit, just a bit, so that we don't get distracted up here. Can you guys hear me in the back? Thank you. Just down a little bit. Cool. Thank you. That in the ancient times, having a lot of money didn't create immense wealth. What created immense wealth was owning gold, silver, copper, tin, diamonds, things that were where? Underground. And in fact, we live in a government that's called a plutocracy, because the immensely wealth are not the people who flash a lot of money. They're the people who are so wealthy that their wealth is hidden. It's an effect underground. And so Pluto represents all those things that are not integrated into the known world. In fact, we moderners now know that everything that is subconscious, unconscious, out of our awareness, all those repressed and suppressed childhood things that make us crazy as adults because we continue to do the dumb shit that we did when we were a kid because we didn't know why we were doing it, but someone slapped our hands when we did something and that made us feel guilty, and we still do that same repetition of those patterns. This is Pluto's realm. It is depth psychology. It is the underworld. So here's the deal. The way you take the power away from those things which are plutonic, that have incredible power because they're unknown and they're hidden, they're unconscious. The way you take that power away is you shine the light of consciousness into the darkness. We call it therapy, but you basically make the unknown known so that you are not fearful of what you don't know. It may be awful, but once you see it, you can engage it and you can work with it. And that's what Pluto is all about.
So why does Pluto like being called a non-planet, being damned, being excluded? Does anybody here know the name Charles Fort? Ooh, you guys got some homework to do. Charles Fort wrote a couple of New York Times bestsellers back in the 1920s. And in fact, there is still a very active Fortean society, Fortean, Charles Fort, F-O-R-T. And Charles Fort's first book was called The Book of the Damned. And the opening line of the book, I'm an Aries, I know the opening line of every book I've ever read, because most of them I've only read the first line, because that's what Aries do. They start things. I'm kidding. But the opening line of the Book of the Damned is this: by the damned, I mean the excluded. You see, when something is excluded, when it's damned, when it's put outside, that's where it gains power. And when Pluto was part of the pack, part of the planetary family, Pluto was kind of like, we all liked it, but Pluto didn't have as much power. Now that he's been excluded again, man, he's back in his strength, because by being damned, that's where Pluto gains its power. Now, what does that have to do with tonight and with what we got going on? Well, a lot, because Pluto is a 250, okay, it's 248 years. All right, if you actually take the wobble of the Earth into consideration, it's kind of only 246 years, but it really takes 248 years for it to make one complete circle around the sun, which means that right now, not tonight, but this year, Pluto is completing one orbit from where it was in July of 1776. What happened then? Anybody think of anything that happened in July of 1776? Well, the country in which we live, for better and for worse, was born with a declaration of independence. Interesting, as long as we're on the Aries kick, as long as I'm on the Aries kick, because I'm always on the Aries kick. Thomas Jefferson was an Aries, and if you only have one word for Aries, you might choose the word independence or freedom. And so it's not out of character that an Aries would largely be the single pen behind the Declaration of Independence. Think about that. Anyhow, we all celebrate our birthday once a year when the sun returns to where it was on the day that we were born. Those of us who know astrology might also celebrate around age 12 a Jupiter return, or around age 29, 30, a Saturn birthday, when Saturn makes one complete cycle around the sun. And even though our society says that we can go to war when we're 18 and we get to vote, and maybe we become legal in some places at 21, astrologers know that we don't become an adult until the Saturn birthday at about age 29 and a half. And anyone who is in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, whatever, you can look back and see yourself at age 25, 26, 27, and then see yourself at age 30, 31, 32, and you go, what happened? Oh my God, I bought a home, I sold a home, I had a kid, I got married, I got divorced, I went back to school, I changed my careers, I killed my parents. I mean, something important. And no, I did not do that. Thought about it, but in teenage years, not as an adult. So these slower moving planets have birthdays, and we are now celebrating not a one day, but a year or so, when Pluto returns to the place where it was when the United States of America was born. This is the United States' Pluto return. Now, what does Pluto mean? We already know it's that which is hidden, that which is out of sight, out of mind, that which is underground. Well, perhaps the largest conceptual thing that we can pin on Pluto is this: death. Because it doesn't matter how much we think we know, we don't really have the experience of what happens after we die, or for that matter, before we are born. And all the mystical traditions will remind us of a couple of things. Number one, consciousness does not need, let me try to say that again without stumbling on my tongue. Okay. One, that consciousness does not require meat to be animated. In other words, we live in our bodies, in our meat suits, but consciousness comes into it and then it leaves it, and it's no big deal. Consciousness does fine before it is reincarnated, and it does fine once it's been disincarnated. We, however, don't get that because this is all we know, and we think that our bodies somehow have created awareness or consciousness. In fact, scientists will tell us that our nervous systems developed, evolved until they reached a level of complexity where we became aware. And exactly the opposite is true. That awareness created the body, not the body creates the awareness. In other words, one of the important metaphysical spiritual teachings is that thought creates reality. Reality does not create thought. This is why all the traditions teach us about meditation or prayer or mind control or intentions or doing things that in some way are conducive with what it is that we think. All right, so back to Pluto. So Pluto is a 250-year cycle, and when Pluto was discovered, it was given the name Pluto because Pluto is Latin for a Greek word that's Hades. Hades was the lord of the underworld. Remember, this dude named Jesus, one of his jobs was to banish Hades from the throne of the hell realms. That's what Jesus did. And although it may have been an important moment in humans' evolution, what it also did, according to James Hillman, is that it robbed, and Joseph Campbell, it robbed each and every individual person of doing their own hero's journey. Because if Jesus did that work of dethroning Hades from the throne of hell, then we have no reason to step into the hidden realms, into our unconscious, and to go on that magical hero's journey where we go into the mysteries and come out transformed. Pluto is the planet of death and rebirth, not necessarily physical death. I think of William Blake, who wanted on his gravestone, his epitaph, he wanted William Blake, born 1757, died many times since. That says it all. Every time someone says no, we go through a little bit of death, but it's ego death. And you see, I love the Trungpa Chogyam Rinpoche, Buddhist teacher. One of my favorite quotes of all times, I can say this every time I open my mouth, it would be a good thing to do. And the quote is, enlightenment is the ego's greatest disappointment because you can't take it with you. So Pluto is the planet of death and rebirth. And when you look at Pluto in someone's chart, or when you look at Pluto cycles, it's not about physical death, but it's about deconstruction of what we thought was real until there's nothing left. And then a reconstruction of the energy at a higher, more integrated, sometimes more complex, sometimes simpler level of being. We think of a caterpillar becoming a butterfly. Does the caterpillar die? No, it goes through a plutonic meltdown in the darkness and emerges as something more complex and more beautiful. Now, we in the United States of America are experiencing a Pluto return. At a Saturn return, Saturn is the planet of responsibility. And so at a Saturn return, we take responsibility, we grow up. The sun is about illumination. It's just about that yearly process. Then at our birthday, we have the light illuminated on us. It's my birthday. Oh, happy birthday, make a wish. You know, when you make a wish and you blow out a candle, you're just performing an old witchy ritual, because in order to send a thought out into the universe, in order to have an intention become manifest, you have to release it. And so when you blow out a candle, when you do most ritual work, you light a candle to focus the energy. But as long as you're focusing on that energy, you'll never be able to have that manifest, because you can't manifest it if you're holding on to it. It's the releasing of it. How many times in our lives has that magical thing happened just when we gave up? You know? So when we make a birthday wish, we're basically having the light shine on us. We're making a wish, an intention, and then we're blowing out the candle to release it. At a Pluto return, however, well, what happens to us in our individual lives when we experience a Pluto return? Wait until you're 250 years old and tell me. We don't ever get to experience that mystery because it goes into those other realms. So here we are at a point where in this country, we are in the death throes of whatever it was that got us here. But we're not yet out of the birth canal. And you know, in the birth canal, it's not a very comfortable place. Okay, I can hear some of you guys saying, yeah, I'd like to, never mind, I'm not going there. Going from the inside out, however, it's about constriction. It's about being forced into this place and not being able to fit. And then as you go, and it sometimes can be very frightening, because the infant in that process is in a state of stress. And when you want to talk about the stress that we as a culture are experiencing and have been really for a long time, but certainly in the past 40, 50, 60, 70 years, even since maybe the world wars back in the turn of the 20th century. But the point is that this is all speeding up right now, because as the apocalyptic doomsayers will say, the end is near. What they don't tell you, though, is that the beginning is near also. And it's not just one point where it ends and then it begins. It's an ongoing process. And we are at that point, not just because of Pluto making this complete cycle, but because there are several planets right now, and it's not unusual for the slow-moving planets to change signs. Pluto has been in Capricorn for the past 15 years or so. It moved into Capricorn right at 2008, right at the point of the banking housing meltdown. And Capricorn is about structure. It's about bank. It's about government. It's about the Constitution, the fundamental underpinnings. And so these things have all gone through a process of deconstruction. And Pluto, now moving into Aquarius, is moving away from the physical realms into the intellectual, metaphysical thought realms of collective consciousness, where we as a community all exist. And you hear a lot about the quote unquote age of Aquarius. And it's important to understand that, that the ages are a very real thing. If you spin a top and you spin it this way, as it begins to slow down, it begins to wobble. But it wobbles in the opposite direction of the spin until it topples over. Well, the Earth is spinning and it wobbles backwards, just like that top. And it makes one complete wobble every 25,000 and a few hundred years, meaning that it takes about 2,100 years for the Earth to wobble through each of the signs. Now, if one understands that we've been in the age of Pisces, Pisces being the fish, and the symbol of the religion of Christianity, then that no matter what religion you happen to practice or happen to have been born into or have happened to reject, whatever your individual stories may be, the fact of the matter is that we keep time on this planet as part of what we call the age of Christianity, the age of Pisces. And we are basically 2,024 years into this 2,160-year cycle. So we're probably a good 130 or 40 or 50 years away from beginning the age of Aquarius, even though people say, oh, no, this is it. This is the dawning of the age of Aquarius. It is the dawning, but you know, the dawn of the day lasts for 10 or 15 minutes. The dawn of an age may last a century. So don't hold your breath. All of this is important, though, because the last time that Pluto moved through the sign of Aquarius, Aquarius, the sign of humanity, Aquarius, the sign of the collective, Aquarius, the sign of conceptual things that link all the individual, apparently separate things. The last time Pluto moved through Aquarius, not only was the United States of America founded, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, but it was also the French Revolution. And the French Revolution and the American Revolution have something in common. And they were the first time that a nation was created and declared itself a sovereign state without a blood family saying that they were in charge because of a divine inheritance of a tradition of being in a royal family. Prior to that, you had kingdoms. Why is the word dumb always after king? Must be all that inbreeding. All right, so what we sometimes forget is that the French Revolution and the American Revolution were really a breakthrough in government styles. Now, we are at a point when now Pluto is moving back into Aquarius. It tipped into Aquarius last March, just because the planets all go that back and forth movement because the Earth is moving around inside of it. That's what makes planets retrograde. They don't really move backwards. Pluto tipped into Aquarius last March, and then it fell back into back into Capricorn in May. And then it's just moved back into Aquarius now in January, where it will be most of the year, but it tips one last time back into Capricorn in September, October, and November during the presidential election. And then it moves back into Aquarius, where it will then stay for the next 20 years, 19, 20 years. Aquarius is the sign of the future. Aquarius is the sign of technology. Remember when Pluto was in Aquarius last time, Benjamin Franklin was flying a kite with, actually he made his son do it because he thought it might kill him. But Benjamin Franklin was flying a kite and realized that electricity not only made the nervous system twitch, but it also was what was going on up there in the sky in lightning. And so the technology at that time was about the discovery and the importance of electricity. Now, as Pluto is moving into Aquarius, when it moved into Aquarius last March, within a couple of days, ChatGPT just went from one end of the internet to the other. And we're going to come back to that in just a moment. But now, as Pluto moved back into Aquarius last month, actually, at the end of January, we had Elon Musk announcing the first known implantation of a microchip into someone's brain that has now been used to control a pointer on a computer. This is real. This has happened. It's documented. Welcome to Pluto in Aquarius. All right. But Pluto in Aquarius is really only part of the story, because Pluto changes signs every 15 to 35 years. It's a very elliptical orbit, so sometimes it moves very fast and other times it moves very slowly. But Neptune spends 14 years in a sign, and Uranus spends 7 years in a sign, and Saturn only spends 2.5 years or so in a sign. But here's the deal. As Pluto moves into Aquarius, kind of wobbling back and forth over that cusp, and cusp is simply Latin for edge. As it's doing that through 2023, 24, 25, during that same period of time, we have Neptune reaching the end of Pisces, where it's been for the past 14 years, and it tips into Aries over the next year or two as it wobbles back and forth from Pisces to Aries. Aries being the first sign of the zodiac and the kind of the recycle point. At the same time, we have Uranus, which has been in Taurus now for about 6 years. And next year, Uranus tips into the next sign of Gemini, which incidentally is where it was when the United States was born. And parenthetically, well, maybe not, every time Uranus has moved through Gemini, the United States has been involved in a significant war. And before you all start freaking out and going, oh my God, does that mean we're in for another war? Let's just remember that there really has never been a time when the United States has not been at war. But we are at war now. And I'm sure this war is going to become more intense, but it may not be physical, because the war right now is being fought in metaphysical dimensions. It's about information. It's who owns reality. And this, we're at the tip of this, even though we might feel like we're already overwhelmed by it. But this is going to become the story over the years ahead, or one of the stories. So when the United States was born, Uranus was in Gemini. That was the American Revolution. The next time Uranus was in Gemini was in the 1860s, and that was the American Civil War. The next time Uranus was in Gemini, it was in the 1940s, and that was World War II. And now Uranus is going to be moving back into Gemini over the next couple of years. So we don't have just Pluto changing signs. I mean, these planets are always changing signs, but rarely, if ever, did all 4 outer planets, meaning Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, all change signs around the same time. And so we have Pluto moving from Capricorn to Aquarius. We have Neptune moving from Pisces to Aries. Incidentally, at the exact same time, Saturn, which is much faster, even though it's the slowest moving of the visible planets, Saturn is now in Pisces also. And over the next year and a half or 2, it will move through Pisces, catch up with Uranus, and they will, catch up with Neptune. And Saturn and Neptune will align exactly at 0 degrees of Aries in February of 2026, less than 2 years down the road. Huge, major astrological stuff. And then, of course, Uranus moving into, I said they would be aligning in Aries. I think I said Gemini. That, let me just say this again to be clear, that Saturn is now moving through Pisces. It entered Pisces a year ago in March. And Saturn spends about 2.5 years in each sign. And Saturn is catching up to Neptune, which has been in Pisces for the last 13 years. And Saturn will catch up to Neptune at 0 degrees of Aries in February of 2026. At that time, Uranus will be moving into Gemini. Pluto will have already moved into Aquarius. And by 2026, we're not going to recognize the world that we live in. It's going to be that amount of change. If we think that things have changed a lot so far in our lives, hold on to your hat or hats or head. So if anyone feels like things are out of control out there, or like, why bother doing anything because it's discouraging, because just everything seems to be falling apart, it might feel like that's bad news, but this is all a really good sign, because it needs to, because it can't continue in the way that it's been going. Just like a caterpillar can't continue to be a caterpillar, its destiny is to be something higher, something more magical, something more organized and beautiful in its construction. And we are there, but it's hard to remember that when we read the news or hear about the latest massacre or killing or genocide or government idiocy or something that happened to someone we love, or illness, or I mean, you guys can make up your own list. Gee, is this fun? Can I go home now? So that's where we are. And floating into this is the amazing alignment of planets that occurred in January of 2020, when every astrologer who was paying attention through 2016, 17, 18, 19 was wondering what was going to happen in January of 2020. And within 24 hours, actually within 12 hours of the exact alignment of the 29.5-year cycle of Saturn and the 248-year cycle of Pluto, within 12 hours of their every 30 to 40-year alignment, that was the first documented case and the announcement of what was then called the Wuhan virus, before anyone really knew what it was. Now, that wasn't the event. That was a symptom of a more complex sequence of events that somehow stopped everything in its tracks. And you can go wherever you want, philosophically, politically, conspiratorially. I encourage you to. Just know that you don't know any more than the person who, or any less than the person who seems to know all of it, because no one has the picture of really, it's going to take years to untangle this one. But the fact of the matter is that January, February, March was for many people the month that never ended. You know, I mean, there were people in March of 2021 that felt like they were still in March of 2020. And in some ways, it wasn't until 2022-ish, even into early 2023, when something began happening and there was energy again, as Saturn moved out of Capricorn into Aquarius and made a 90-degree angle with Uranus, the planet of the future, the planet of technology, the planet associated in modern astrology with the sign of Aquarius. So all of this is leading to the fact that the outer planets have also been getting closer together in a grouping on one side of the sun, which means that they kind of have been traveling in a pack. We'll look at a chart in just a moment so you can see this visually. What this means is that although all the outer planets, all the real planets, I say real meaning excluding the sun and the moon, all the real planets that go around the sun, all have retrograde motion, and they all go retrograde. The outer planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, they all go retrograde every year. Mars goes retrograde every other year almost, the same with Venus every year and a half. Mercury goes retrograde 3 times a year, and that's the one we know the best because it moves the fastest and then it screeches to a halt, at least it looks like it does, and it reverses. And so Mercury retrograde is very noticeable. Incidentally, Mercury had turned direct on the 1st of January and it turns retrograde again. It's still moving pretty quickly, but it's beginning to slow down through the end of March. And on April 1st, Mercury turns retrograde again. And when we meet back here on the eve of my April 6th birthday, on April 5th, on Friday night, we will have a lot to talk about Mercury retrograde at that point in time. But all the planets go retrograde. It's part of nature. There's a reason for it. It's not bad. It's a regrouping of sorts. However, it's only when all the planets are clustered close together that they all seem to go retrograde around the same time. And last year and later this year, we had pretty much from September, October, November, December, pretty much all the outer planets were going retrograde at the same time. And they began moving direct, really starting in October. But last year was a study in we're not going anywhere. We just seem to be. I'm sorry, but I don't take calls while I'm teaching. Where was I? Okay, retrograde. That everything seemed to stop. It just seemed like everywhere on the planet, nothing was making any progress. We weren't getting anywhere. And yet 2024 began with Mercury turning direct. And then by the end of January, Uranus turned direct. And now every planet is moving direct. Every planet. And we're going somewhere. It's just hard to tell where. And this is the most important thing we can take from the astrology of this moment of this month. Things are moving, but you know, it's like when that first little twig of green, or what do you call it, a sprig? What do you call something that's a sprout of something green comes up over through the soil, you can't tell whether it's going to be a dandelion or an oak tree. It's just a touch of green. And that's where we are in the cycle. Things are beginning to move. But anyone who thinks they know what's going to happen later this year or next year doesn't. I don't care what kind of, practice they have or what astrology they're using. In fact, I got misquoted in The Stranger a couple of weeks ago because it was stated that I said that neither Trump nor Biden would win the election in the fall. That's not what I said. What I said was, and I can't believe I'm saying this out loud again because it was stupid enough when I said it the first time, but I actually still believe it. What I said was this: what I'm going to say is not based upon astrology, but it's based upon a combination of knowing the astrology of the times and a hunch. And that is, I do not think that either Biden or Trump will be on the ticket. We will not have either of them to vote for in November. Not that neither of them would win. Maybe that means that. And I don't know what this really means. I just know that we're in such a dynamic place right now that there's so many twists and turns and sudden things that can and probably will happen, that to say what's going to happen around the bend is crazy. Now, what does this mean for us in our daily lives? What it means is that we need to take care of ourselves. There's an old Hopi Indian prophecy that says the elders have talked about a time when the rivers would speed up and time would change. That is happening now, they say. And that those who try to hold on to the bank will be torn in half by the power of the river. Instead, they tell us, push out into the center and let the river carry you. And at this time, keep your head above water and look around, because it's those people that are in the water with you, with their heads above water too. This is your new family. Rejoice. Be with them. It goes on. It's much more philosophical than I can make believe that I could repeat. But the point is that holding on to things right now will tear us apart. And that doesn't mean that one should just go with the flow, as some people have been known to say. Only dead fish go with the flow. There is a time to hold on, is to take a position, to stand for what is important and is right. And that will become more and more important as this year progresses. So I hope this is not what you were expecting tonight, because I think it's really important sometimes from an astrological perspective to stand back from the day-to-day, hour-to-hour, and look at a more global perspective, and at the same time understand that if we don't watch where we're putting our foot down in every step, if we don't pay attention to what's going on day by day, week by week, that we won't ever get to make it to the ocean. We won't ever get that far down the river. That survival is important. And it's easy for us sitting here in a world where we actually have a life. I say in a world, I mean in our world, in our local situation, where we can actually take the time and have communion and think about things like this when other people are being shot at just for reaching for food. So let's just keep all that in mind. And that's part of why I want to just have these thoughts with you. By the way, the daily, day by day by day by day, is available on the internet from 1,000 astrologers. And certainly my March forecast is up, and that is a day by day. We're going to look at a chart here in just a few minutes, and I'm going to just point out a few things. But it seemed like there's enough people now, not only here, but watching online. Okay, here's a statistic for you. Last month, over 40,000 people watched this event here online. So I'm just being aware that the monthly forecasts that I do online, I think that the monthly forecast that I did last month had about 60,000 views. There's obviously a lot of people watching both of them. So I don't want to come here and just spout the same things that I'm already covering there, which is why I'm trying to take a little bit of a different view. And it's really important that we keep almost it's like a shifted reality where we have like one eye watching everything within 10 feet of us, so to speak, or maybe 100 feet, or maybe 5 miles, or maybe even on the planet, certainly within our family and our relationships. And then with the other eye, we should be able to look back to creation, whatever that means, and forward to whatever it is ahead, because it's putting ourselves in that wider scheme. You know, this is why I relentlessly keep coming back to this concept of thinking globally is okay, but thinking cosmically is really important, because the only thing that we can increase is our awareness. And yet increasing our awareness and not acting in our immediate local environment is just a waste of energy. It's like, why bother? You know, just go back and twiddle your thumbs. We do this for a reason. We try to get a better perspective. The Buddhists would teach us that the only thing we can ever change is our awareness, because when our awareness changes, that changes the choices that we get to make in the present moment. And those choices that we didn't know we could make, when we make them, that's what alters our trajectory and changes our future. So, end of rant. That's okay. All right, what time do we got? It's 5:16. Okay, we're good. I have 2 things that I'd like to do. I want to share a poem with you that kind of focuses our energy on what I've been talking about here. Some of you who have studied with me individual or in smaller groups know that sometimes I do share some poems that I've written. This particular one, I actually shared at the Conscious Life Expo at their talent show, which was kind of weird, but I did. And I got enough positive feedback that I'm kind of like, I want to share it with you guys tonight. And the name of the poem is Present Tense. And by the way, if you want a copy of the poem, send me an email, ask me for a copy. I will send you a link that has it in it if you're so interested. All right, and it goes like this, and I'll kind of keep the words on the screen. Those of you who are listening online don't have the screen, and that's okay. It goes like this. The poem is called Present Tense. And obviously, as a word meister, pun master, double entendre, I think is what this is. There's past tense, future tense, and this is present tense. The lightning hits, the shift is now. I close my eyes and take the vow to release the future and the past, to focus on the present vast, extending through infinity, extending far as I can see. The lightning hits, the sky lights up, the waters pour forth from my cup, the feelings pour forth from my heart as from my past. As from the past, my life does part. The walls of safety tumble down, my head goes spinning round and round. I'm standing high out on a ledge. I leap onto the razor's edge where form can split and separate. Ambivalence turns to love and hate, where unity is sliced in two. Choice shows us what we must do, where issues are forced, so we must choose something to gain, something to lose, something feared, something desired. The pressure to choose makes me grow tired. Something I want, something I fear. Excitement mounts as the moment grows near. Time speeds up and my heart beats fast. I fear this moment will not last, but then I remember the razor's edge and the illusion of feeling like I'm on that ledge. For the moment of now is all that exists. Create past and future, then something resists events in the future that hurt long ago, creating rough water in time's river flow, for time is a river that flows to the sea. The storm waves dissolve when we just let it be. But when the past and the future are locked in desire, the rapids build, the waves grow higher, but it's all in the mind, for the ledge is unreal. The fear of the fall is the fate that we seal. The razor is safe if we stay here and now. So I soften my vision and repeat my old vow. I release unborn futures, letting go of the past, and the infinite present grows cosmically vast. All right, thank you. By the way, I always think of that poem as my Uranian poem, because for those of you who know the archetype of Uranus, it has to do with that lightning striking and the suddenness of the moment. And that in Buddhism, there's a teaching in Buddhism called Dzogchen, not dog Zen, which is what it looks like. But Dzogchen is the understanding that enlightenment can only and ever happen now. It can never happen tomorrow, and it certainly can't happen last week. And that this idea that this moment, this present moment, is the only moment in which enlightenment can happen. And enlightenment is not a one-time thing. It's that razor's edge that requires attention always to, in effect, like sliding down a banister and not having it slice you in half, but instead making that razor kind of wide enough perceptually that you just travel through time on that razor's edge. So let's look at a chart and all right. And Sam, do I share my screen here?
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to set, oh, I suppose I could do that. Share screen. And this could work. And by the way, what we are looking at here is a chart for, I think I can hide this also. Hold on, hide. No, that didn't do it. All right, that'll be fine. So this is a chart for right now in Redmond, Washington. And for those of you who are not used to looking at a chart, all these little symbols are the planets and what sign they're in. We can see that the sun is at 12 degrees of Pisces, and it's actually right in between Saturn at 10 degrees of Pisces and Mercury at 14 degrees of Pisces. And even Neptune is in Pisces toward the end, almost 27 degrees, 26 degrees and 47 minutes. But you can see here that with the exception of the moon and this little thing that looks like an upside down headphone, these are the nodes of the moon, which I want to talk about in a minute, because the nodes of the moon are where the orbit of the moon going around the Earth crosses the orbit of the Earth going around the sun. And although there's nothing there that we can see, it's maybe one of the most important points in astrology, because it turns out that, as the Hindus know, everything that we see is really illusion. What does that mean? It means that scientists know there's no such thing as a particle, that particles are created when we observe waves crisscrossing with other waves. If you throw two rocks in a pond, the ripples go out, and where those ripples cross, they make what are called standing waves that don't move, but make waves going out from there. When we see something that's solid, like a table or like the ground, what's happening is electrons or subatomic events that are occurring, that are flashing on and off at thousands of trillions of times every second. I mean, here's something to think about. The entire universe is blinking on and off at hundreds and thousands of trillions of times a second. But they're not particles, they're waves crisscrossing that give the illusion of physicality, that there are cosmic rays that go through the earth without even knowing there's anything solid there. And by the same token, anyone who has dabbled, let's say, in plant medicine or various other forms of consciousness altering knows that physical things are not quite as physical as they sometimes seem. And those states can be certainly obtained through various breathing techniques and yoga techniques and other things other than substances. But the point here is that where waves crisscross, that's where the magic occurs. That's where the magic occurs. And the wave of the moon going around the earth, because, and some of you I know have heard this from me before, we look up there, we see the moon, the full moon a few days ago. Wow, look at it, it's beautiful. It's a particle. It's a big particle. I call them BFPs, big fucking particles. BFPs. Saturn is a particle. When we do a chart, we're mapping Uranus, a particle, Jupiter, a big gassy particle, Chiron, a particle that's smaller and doesn't fit into the planetary lineup, but we still use all these particles. But when we're not looking at them, they travel like waves, just like photons, which is a particle of light. When we don't look at it, travels like a wave. Quantum physicists call this the particle wave duality. I could talk for 3 hours on this, and in fact have. You could probably find it on the internet somewhere where I've done that. Not tonight. Tonight, though, I just want to make sure we understand that when we're looking at a chart and we're looking at the particles, the nodes are not particles, they're places where two waves cross. That leaves the moon and all these other planets, which are the Sun and Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, and all of them are clustered together. Can you see how close they are? And in fact, if I move this, I actually want to put up I want to put up a different chart, but before I do, I just want to point out that this chart for right now shows that this is the horizon and that the sun is beneath the horizon. If I backed this up a couple of hours, let's just back it up 2 hours, there's the sun and it's now above the horizon. And so this is like a 24-hour clock. If I move this ahead an hour at a time, we can see that the sun will eventually reach the bottom beneath our feet, and then eventually it will rise tomorrow on March 2nd, sometime around 6 or 7 a.m. But what I'm showing you here is this chart from a point of view here in Redmond, Washington. What I want to do now, because there are people watching this all over the world, and what I want to do is I want to show you the same chart, but instead I want to take the horizon out, and I am putting this with 0 degrees Aries rising, just because that's the first sign of the zodiac. So there's no horizon in this at all anymore. But what we can see now is if I move this ahead a day at a time, watch the moon moving closer and closer to these other planets. All these planets are moving, but they're moving so slowly a day at a time. The sun moves 1 degree a day. So here it is at 11 degrees, 59 minutes. That's almost 12 degrees. But if I move this ahead an hour, that'll be at 12 degrees. Now, if I move this ahead a day at a time, That sun will move about 1 degree. There it is at 13 degrees. There it is at 14 degrees. But every day, the moon is going to move almost a half a sign. It's going to move about 12 degrees, 12 to 14 degrees. So if I move this ahead a couple of days, that moon will all of a sudden move into Aquarius, not all of a sudden, gradually. It'll move into Aquarius. Oh, sorry about that. Get rid of that. And you can see now that as the moon moves through Aquarius, Pisces, Aries, and Taurus, it's going to be moving through that area where all the other planets are. And the reason why I want you to see this is that it is rare for so many planets to be clustered on one side, not only one side, but in a very narrow area. I mean, if I were to arbitrarily move this back a year at a time, a few years, here we can see now that the planets, there's Saturn, they're all over the place. In other words, it's very unusual to have so many planets clustered so close together. This is an incredible amount of focus, and they're all moving forward. They've all turned direct, but it's like that sprout. We don't know where they're going yet. Now, let's come back to this moment where we are right now. And what I want to point out is that over the next week or so, we will have first Mercury, then the sun on March 18th, 19th, the sun will move from Pisces into Aries. That's the spring equinox. So I'm going to move this ahead a day at a time so we can see this. And before I actually make this happen, I want to make one other note here. And that is, there's this planet that looks like a key, like a special K, and that's Chiron, which is the original mentor. Chiron was a centaur. Many astrologers refer to Chiron as the wounded healer, but unfortunately, that allows us to focus on the wound rather than the healing. And Chiron was really the original teacher of the gods. He taught Asclepius about medicine and Hercules how to fight and so on. And so what's important here is that Chiron moves relatively slowly, as do the nodes of the moon. But you can see here that they're at the same degree. Can you see that? Chiron, the planet of healing and teaching. The planet that teaches us where our wounds are, that we can remedy them. We maybe can't cure them, but at least we can work with them, and we can do something positive rather than just suffering. And the fact that Chiron and the node of the moon, what's called the north node of the moon, I don't want to go too technical, but I want to keep this in simple terms. But Chiron lined up with the nodes are magical points. In Vedic astrology, the Hindus, they called the nodes Rahu and Ketu, the dragon's breath, the dragon's head, and the dragon's tail. They were magical points because they were like portals that came from other space-time realities into different space-time realities. They were like energy vortexes. And that whenever the sun and the moon aligned, as they do once every 2 weeks, the sun and moon align together on the same side of the earth, we call that a new moon. If they align on opposite sides of the earth, that's a full moon. Are you with me? Whenever the sun and the moon align, and they do that 24, 26 times a year, because there's a new moon about 13 times a year. The problem with our solar calendar is that although we call it a month, it's really not quite a full, it's not a month, it's a little bit over a month. There's 12 in our calendar rather than some lunar calendars, which actually have 13 months. Anyhow, when there's a sun-moon conjunction, let's move this forward to right around, I think it's very early on the 10th. I don't need to make this exact, but you can see here that the moon and the sun are pretty close together, yeah? When the sun and the moon align, we can't see them because we can see the sun, but the moon is lost in the rays of the sun. Now, if the moon and the sun are at exactly the same, in the same plane, remember, the nodes of the moon are where the orbit of the moon intersects with the orbit of Earth. And so if there's a new moon, when the moon and the sun are aligned and they're both lined up with the node, that's an eclipse. Because at that point, the moon comes in front of the sun like it does once a month. But normally it does it higher or lower than the sun. So we look at it and we can't see it because the sun blinds us. But if it's exactly at the same height, it'll block out the light of the sun. So this is why the ancients knew about the nodes, even though there was nothing there, because eclipses were incredibly important. And the reason why I'm having this whole discussion about nodes is not only because Chiron, the planet of healing, is lining up with the nodes now, but we're moving into eclipse season because eclipses occur in pairs, 2 or 3 at a time, and they do that twice a year. And we have an eclipse. If we move this forward again a day at a time, we can see that the full moon, which occurs when the moon is opposite the sun. So we went ahead one day too far. And again, we could do this an hour at a time to make this more exact. And that's close enough for now. Can you see here that the moon is opposite the sun? 5 degrees of Libra, 5 degrees of Aries. All right. When there's a full moon or a new moon that is close to the node, can you see here that it's 11 degrees away from the node, but it's close to the nodes? That's an eclipse. And in fact, if I were to take this and move this ahead 2 weeks and then back it up just a touch. Oh, I got to move it forward a touch. I went the wrong way. There we go. So here we have an alignment of the new moon that occurs on April 8th. And there is the sun and the moon at 19 degrees of Aries. Oh, and look, Chiron is at 19 degrees of Aries too. And they're still only a few degrees away. If you put your hand out like that, that's about 3 or 4 or 5 degrees in the sky. So that's how close the new moon, and the sun, and Chiron, if you go 1 billion miles further, and how they're exactly all lined up at the same north-southness, you know, because they're close to the nodes of the Earth going around the sun and the moon going around the Earth. This eclipse is not until April 8th. When we meet next month on April 5th, we'll be 3 days away from this eclipse. And when we meet the following month in May, we'll be able to go, oh, so that's what happened. All I can say is that everything that's going on right now, if it feels imbalanced, you see eclipses are when the new moon, which is a beginning, an ending and a beginning of a new cycle, the full moon, which we're coming into, is basically the fruition of the cycle. And when these occur lined up with the nodal axis, there's something that brings us way back into the past and way into the future. It's like we get to reprocess stuff that wasn't processed right. Things come back around at us. People come up from the past. If we're paying attention, eclipses can teach us what it is that we need to let go of, that's weighing us down, that we don't even realize it. And this is all part of a much larger process that we are going through. And this is why I'm trying to spend time on this tonight, so that we can see what the hell is really going on out there, why it's all just beyond our ability to put it together. If some of you, like me, I'm a kind of person where even when things get out of control, there's a part of me that goes, yeah, I get it, kinda. You know, even if I don't get it. And right now, no one gets it because it's all out of control in every different direction, because we as a species are in the birth canal. We're panicking because we feel like we're dying because everything's being compressed and we can't take a deep breath, and we don't have the freedom that we would normally have. And we can't see what it's going to be like when we get to the other end of this contractive, dark, tight tunnel that is just feeling like things are getting tighter and tighter and tighter. Hi there. Hi there. Hi there. Hello. Hello. Oh, it's so easy. It's kittens and kids, you know. How easy for a Gemini rising to get distracted. Okay. So these eclipses that are coming up, the full moon eclipse next week, actually it's on, what did I say? It's on the 25th. And then the following new moon eclipse are incredibly important because eclipses are turning points. There's a saying from mythology about the solar eclipse, because the king was considered to be the sun king. And it's long live the king is dead, long live the king. In other words, eclipses are often associated with the fall from power of someone or something. And that doesn't mean that twice a year every leader is going to fall, but it does mean that there's an energy of that's out there. But here's why this eclipse or this eclipse season is so significant. Number one, it's the first eclipse since Pluto has been in Aquarius. Remember, that was 230 some odd years ago when there was an eclipse with Pluto in Aquarius. Aquarius being the sign of humanity, of combined consciousness, of equality. And let me also go on record that everything has a shadow, or maybe except for Sagittarians. Kidding. Everything has a shadow. And there's a lot of talk about the age of Aquarius, universality, equality, equanimity, gender equanimity, racial equality, all this sense of, you know, the human social condition will become elevated and it will become a time of universal brotherhood amongst humans. Well, I have a one-word response to anyone who tells me that. And it will make more sense if you were an early Star Trek fan. And the answer is Borg. Now, for those of you who don't know Star Trek, Borg was an incredibly intelligent race of insectoid beings that when you encountered one and you say, "Who are you?" the response is, "We are Borg." No, who are you? We are Borg, and we shall assimilate you. Resistance is futile. Okay, direct quotes from Star Trek. Do you feel the dark side of Aquarius? If you don't understand science fiction, and one of the cool things I did, by the way, with this artificial intelligence guy sitting next to me on the panel, you guys were there. He was ranting or going on about how, you know, reality could actually be a simulation. And I wrote this about, I don't know, maybe 40 years ago or so. And it goes like this. It's just a short couplet. And you know, if I didn't have to make a living being an astrologer, I would just read and write poetry. But the line goes like this, or the two lines. Science fiction has become science faction. Science fiction has become science faction, but look at the robots, they have no reaction. That's where we are these days. We're going to come back to AI in a few minutes here, but this whole thing, now I lost my train of thought. Why did I even think of that? Someone help me out. Where was I? No. Huh? Borg. Pluto in Aquarius. All right. So thank you. This is the first eclipse with Pluto in Aquarius. And on top of that, this eclipse is lining up with Chiron, the healer, the teacher. And on top of that, we are only a couple of weeks, we're about a week and a half away, actually just short of 2 weeks away from a once every 14-year alignment of Jupiter, which takes 12 years to go around once, catching up with Uranus that takes 84 years to go around once. but it takes 12 years for Jupiter to get around, and then another couple of years to catch up to Uranus. So about every 14 years, Jupiter, the planet of optimism, expansion, the planet of bigger, better, more, Jupiter, the magnifying lens, Jupiter, the planet of Sagittarius and even of Pisces, that has to do with expansion and big ideas and adventure and travel. Jupiter's cool, man. Jupiter was king of the mountain, Mount Olympus, the king of the gods. You know, he was Maximus Optimus. He was like the biggest, the best, the greatest. And I always have to say that, unfortunately, too much of a good thing is not a good thing. Hippocrates said that every tonic can be toxic in quantity. So we have Jupiter, the planet of bigger, better, more, lining up with what? Uranus, the planet of Aquarius, the planet of the future, the planet of technology, the planet of radical, rebellious, electrical lightning striking. I read that poem, my Uranus poem, for a reason, because it's that something happens and the light bulb goes on and we're, wow, I get it. What happened? You know, but that moment, that's the Uranus energy. And so when Jupiter catches up with Uranus once every 14 years, things happen like Apple comes out with the first iPad. You know, I mean, clockwork inventions in this 14-year cycle. And what's this going to be? Well, we can imagine it could be related to one of the 4 initial sets that I think is all we need to know about the future. And now I'm bringing this back full swing to where I wanted to start with, because I came here tonight with only these notes. Nodes, Chiron, eclipses, and then I have 4 sets of what's the right word? Anacronyms. I always get confused between acronyms, anacronyms, and acronyms. One is things from the past. The other is making new words out of the same letters. And the other is letters that stand for something. And the acronyms that I have are AI, ARET, and EIEIO. I'm not making this up. Huh? Bingo. All right. That's right. And Bingo was his name. All right. So AI is obvious, artificial intelligence. And we could do a deep dive on this. We're not going to. I'm just want to go on record. Someone criticized me on my last month's YouTube and said, what kind of idiot is this guy saying that there's going to be a lot more AI? He needs astrology for that. No, I don't need astrology for that. I just am intrigued by the fact that the day that, or the week that Pluto moved into Aquarius, ChatGPT took over our consciousness. And the day it moved, or the week that it moved back into Aquarius, we have our first example of a Neuralink is the name of the company, implant, and that AI will become increasingly important. And it's like putting yourself back, you know, maybe before there were cell phones or before there was Facebook or Instagram or electricity or something, and trying to figure out what it would be like when we had those things. We can't. There's no way. And that's how big AI is going to be. It's going to make whatever the internet was or is seem small. AI. The second is AR. Anyone know what that is? Augmented reality. And augmented reality may go hand in hand, but it's not the same as AI. Augmented reality is really what we already have. Because when I go home and I go, Alexa, what's the temperature outside? That's a form of AI. When I say, Alexa, what's happening in Washington, D.C. today? And Alexa can tell me, these are ways in which our reality is being augmented. However, when we get the implantation and the contact lenses and the Apple Vision, which incidentally is not lost on me, that like the first iPad, Apple Vision has become a product the year of a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. Again, these things are not exact. These are slow-moving cycles that actually have different points along the way, but they're more like waves. Remember, planets are waves, not BFPs, particles. All right, augmented reality will become more and more of a thing over the years ahead. And no, you don't need to be an astrologer to note that, but seeing what's going on and the timing of this and the looming Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. And in fact, if we move this ahead a day at a time to April 20th, right there, we can see on April 20th that Jupiter at 21.5 degrees of Taurus catches up to Uranus, and then boom, is on the other side of it. And Jupiter moves faster. It'll be 14 years before it catches up to it again. So this is what's in our future. AI, AR, augmented reality, looking at someone walking down the street and going, "Hi, Bob, what's it like growing up in Milford, Connecticut? Do you know me? No, but I got that off the internet, not the internet, but the internet, the augmented reality that we will at some point in time all have, like it or not. All right, AR, AI, AR, ET. I'm not doing this deep dive now, and there are many people who could, but on that panel that I was on at Conscious Life Expo, one of the people on that panel was a man named Dan Sheehan, who was the attorney who worked on the Daniel Ellsberg Pentagon Papers. That was a really big deal thing in the 70s. And he defended Daniel Ellsberg. And for the last few years, he's been working in Washington, D.C. On ET disclosure. This is not made up shit. If you don't know anything about it, you don't know about it. But it's not fantasy. There's major stuff happening from every direction right now. And the pressure is very great for more disclosure. What will that mean? What will be disclosed? That becomes anyone's guess, because there's lots of different people with different issues and with different agendas. But AI, AR, ET, and then EIEIO. Okay, EIEIO has two pieces to it. Number one, Old McDonald's farm has goats and chickens and pigs and turkeys, and everything's making different sounds and different noises, right? That's where we live. We are all on Old McDonald's farm, and that to try to homogenize it and make everyone speak the same, the dogs are going to go bow wow wow, and the cats are going to do whatever cats do. Yeah, maybe. Or but when we talk about the acronym, we're talking EIEIO, and I think that stands for external, E, internal, I. I'll say more about each of these in a moment. Evolution, E, intelligence, I, and O, oscillation. What the hell do these things have in common? Well, first of all, the internal and the external are not reflective of one another. We misinterpret what we call the golden tablet, or the emerald tablet, the as above, so below. Most people think that that means what's up there makes what's down here to happen. No, it's the whole saying is as above, so below. The within, or the inside of things, is the same as the outside of things. The macrocosm and the microcosm are not reflective of one another. They are one. We are just riding on a razor wave, surfing an interference pattern, a node that is basically vibrating at the halfway points between these macro and micro hums. That's reality. EI, external, internal, one and the same. If bad shit's happening out there, we can't blame it on out there. We have to clean it up in here for it to clean up out there. Remember, thought precedes reality. This is Mahayana Buddhism 101, which I rephrase as no one gets off till everyone gets off. And you can use that any way you want. All right. EI, external, internal. E, again, evolution. We are not the end point of evolution any more than an amoeba was, or a frog, or an orangutan, or humans 150 years ago before they had telephones. Do you realize that if you were alive in the 1860s, when the phone was invented, that it still would have been, oh geez, probably another 40 or 50 years where you could have sat in the bathtub without having to get up to answer the damn phone. You know, in other words, we forget that technology is always evolving into something else. And we don't know how the technologies that are bubbling up now, how they're going to impact us. And one could make the case that machines are not unnatural. Is honey natural or unnatural? It's natural. Bees make it. What about the honeycombs? They didn't exist before bees made it. What about a steam engine? Oh no, that's mechanical and not natural. It can't be unnatural. It's made within nature. And in fact, one could make a case for human beings being the honeybee of the phylum Machinus. That is just another phylum of nature. And now we come to the next level of problem of what's being disguised as AI. Anyone who's read their fair share of science fiction knows that there's an entire genre of sci-fi that is the ongoing multi-million-year battle between the orgs and the mechs. Now, these are not the Mexicans. They're the mechanicals and the organics. And that is an ongoing dance. Anyhow, evolution. We are not the endpoint of evolution. Nietzsche talked about the Superman, the Overmensch. Unfortunately, it was misused by fascists, Hitler, to do what he did. But that's not what Nietzsche was talking about. We are not the endpoint of evolution. We are the launching point of something that's around the corner that we are becoming part of, and we don't know yet what it is. Evolution. The next I is intelligence. This will come to pass by an increase of intelligence, and intelligence actually then leads to the last O, which is oscillation, because intelligence is wave frequency. Nikola Tesla said, if you want to know the secrets of the universe, you need to study energy, frequency, and vibration. That's what oscillation is. So that basically is the end of my little rant about this month, this year, this decade. It's AI, A-R-E-T, and E-I-E-I-O. And we're going to take a few-minute break. For those of you who've had enough of me, happy evening, go off, be awesome. For anyone who either wants to be on my mailing list or has never had their chart done, I will pick 2 or 3 names out of a pile here. I have little, actually, these right here. You can fill out your name, your email address. I will not overwhelm you with anything, but I will have you in my file to let you know when we're meeting again. And I'll pick 3 names and I'll do 3 charts, real live time, just to kind of give you a flavor of how this works in real motion. We'll take, like I say, about a 5 or 10 minute break, and then we will reassemble. And I think I'm missing something. Oh yeah, I am. 2 things. One is a great thank you to our baristas and our hosts who and the next layer out, and that is SoulFood, who basically allows this space to be used for community events like this. I do not charge for my being here, and you do not necessarily pay for being here. However, they do have a fund, and if you want to contribute, you can go to the register and they will ring you up or charge your card for $1 or $50 or whatever you'd like to contribute, because it is that allows this to go on. And that leads me to the last thing on this little rant, and that is we all have birthdays and things that we're doing or things that we have to buy gifts for. Don't buy it at the big box store down the block or Amazon. Take a walk around the store, buy something here. Supporting our community economically is the best way that we can vote, because sometimes voting doesn't necessarily do what we want or need it to do. So that's it. I'll reconvene in a few minutes. Again, if you've never had your chart done here, you can fill that out. I'll draw a few. And for those of you online, we're going to go mute for a few minutes, but we will be back. And thank you all And I think that probably then is enough for now. All right, so let me. Feel free to chat amongst yourselves. And we will be back here in a few minutes. I'm going to stop my screen sharing now. By the way, oh, wait a minute. Hello, internet. It's so strange. There's here and there's there, but they are here. And where is here? It's like, that's another thing about that whole Aquarius thing, that we've lost spatial continuity. I mean, did you ever sit in a Zoom meeting with 6 people, you know, from like 4 different countries? And it's, oh, we're all here. Really? The cards on that table have my email address on it, and feel free to send me an email if you want a copy of that poem. And I can, and if you want to be on my mailing list and you don't, on my email list, and didn't fill out one of these, the website there, ricklevineastrologer.com, you can sign up to be on my email list. And I promise I will never be the person that sends you enough shit that you want to not be on it. And if you ever not want to be on it, there'll be a check mark at the bottom of every email that says, get me out of here. So, so there. All right, how are we doing? You guys are like the hardcore. Can't get rid of you. Can we get some maple syrup or something for this? Looks like my breakfast. Yeah, I have paper for breakfast. All right, there's one. There's, oh, that's it right there. There's 2. And let's turn them all upside down a couple of times and get, and there's 3. Okay. All right. Is your mother beating you again? All right, how about Preston? Preston, you don't seem very excited, Preston. You don't seem very excited. Are you here because you have to?
For my mom.
Use course. Yeah, he drove me here.
All right, for those of you on the internet, I don't know if we have, do we have connection again?
No, it was good.
We're good?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen, but unfortunately, I'm going to need to go out of this program and come back into it. And
It's still being shared on the screen. Do you think?
no, it can't be. It doesn't say that it is. All right, now I am sharing my screen again, but I don't understand. All right, and now we're going to reload the astrology software, which killed itself. And we are going to look at Preston's chart. Preston, who's here under duress as the designated driver, apparently. And I don't think I need to ask Preston if he's ever had his chart done before, because I think he'd go, what's a chart?
No, my mom has done it.
All right. Okay, Preston, born March 12th, 2004. March 12th, 2004. You have a birthday coming up. A solar return, 7:05 p.m. 7:05 p.m. and in Lincoln City, or and so I am looking at Preston's chart for the first time. What I'm going to be doing on each of these charts is not to be confused with a quote unquote real reading, but I'm going to be basically looking at the chart and just trying to give you a sense of how I approach a chart and what that means. And as I look at Preston's chart, the first thing that I notice is that the sun at 22 degrees, almost 23 degrees, but 22 degrees of Pisces is connected by this big fat red line to Pluto, which is at 22 degrees of Sagittarius. Now, for those of you who are astrologers, you'll know that those big fat lines, they get fatter as they get closer and tighter in exact angle, and that the angle between the sun and Pluto is 90 degrees. And a 90-degree angle, astrologers call a square, and a square is an angle of conflict or stress. When two planets are squared, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, although I sometimes argue with my personal trainer about whether stress is a good or bad thing, because as they say, no pain, no gain. But stress is required to do anything. Otherwise, we would just blob through life. And as I look at your chart, and I see that that Pluto, which is, we talked earlier, it's the planet of intense transformation. It's the planet of death and rebirth. And again, not physical death, but it has to do with the intensity of the volatility of what needs to happen when something ends, or we take something apart, or we experience something turning into something else. And what's interesting to me as I look at your chart, I see the moon in Sagittarius nearby Pluto, and Sagittarius is that sign of it's the Jupiter sign. It's expansive. It's optimistic. It's let's go. It's an adventure. Let's do it. But Pluto kind of puts a shadow on things sometimes, because Pluto's intensity, because it's at odds with your vitality, your sun. I mean, it's almost like the sun and Mercury, kind of close together, but the sun and Uranus and Pisces, there's a part of you probably that would just as soon be, a dreamer, a person who, is more either artistic or in some way that's not satisfied with just what's out there. I mean, there's something that draws you into. I don't know how you might frame it or how it works for you, but whatever that is, that part of you sometimes is a bit at odds with the part of you that is always having to do things or go somewhere or make something or be something out there. It's almost like there's a power struggle sometimes that goes on that may, and a lot of these things originate in family of origin dynamics, where there's maybe something that is kind of pushing you or forcing you to do something or be something, whereas you would rather do or be something else. Now, having said that, all those blue lines represent smoother energy and an easier energy. And there's some really nice flows here that have to do with Venus in her home sign of Taurus, that I'm kind of beginning to get this picture of a part of you that might be pleasure and kind of oriented towards, maybe sometimes taking, like wanting more of whatever's easy, on some level. And yet reality doesn't let you get away with that. There's always things that you have to do. There's responsibilities or things that come in. And this blue line connecting Saturn, the planet of responsibility, which is the highest planet in your chart, which suggests to me that you take responsibility, whether people realize that about you or not. There's a part of you that really does have a mission, that there's something, that's important to you out there that you want to get. And on some level, because Saturn is in Cancer, there is a sense of holding back or a restraint on feelings or on vulnerability or emotions, but wanting to somehow create something stable and to protect either someone or family or somehow be that anchor. But here's the weird thing, is that Saturn, the planet of status quo and stability, is harmonizing with Uranus, the radical, the rebellious, the Saturn says make it real, and Uranus says blow it up. you know, and there's just this, but somehow you get to hold both of those positions with that normally seem very opposite, but in your world somehow there's a dance that you get to do. You get to be both the inventive, innovative, out of the box, not follow. You know what it is? It's a little bit of I hate authority, but I am authority. But it's not like you make people do it's not like your power. How do I want to say it? It's not like you use your authority to make others do it. In some way, there's a part of you that is out of the box, and yet people actually conform or look to you as kind of some stabilizing factor. There's something about your chart and your life that I think is really grounded. And yet all of that hides behind this pleasant Libra rising, that this part of you that I think in some ways becomes the diplomat, the go-between. And I'm getting very little back from you. How is this making any sense to you at all, or none at all? Let the jurors note that the defendant nodded his head once without really meaning it. No, no. Are we okay? Is this making any sense to you seriously? Yeah. Which part?
The parts that you explained
Uh-huh. So yeah, I get that on some level, that as you go through life, there's more going on than people know or than people see, and that there's probably a lot of the power struggle that you work with is held internally, and that it's easier to move through life and to I don't know, almost like take the easy way out or be nice, or I don't know if that's making any sense to you or not, but that's kind of what I'm suggesting here. And I would also imagine, if we look at this from a standpoint of timing, and then we're going to move on, and like I've said, these are not really deep dives, but if we take your chart and put where the planets are in the sky, this is your chart now in the middle. The lines are all gone. But what I'm looking for is the planet Saturn in the sky now, which I mentioned earlier tonight, is in the sign of Pisces. But if we move this back, and we move this back until Saturn is in Sagittarius, we can see that roughly in 2016, so you would have been, 14 years old? Is that, no, 12 years old. Is that right? 2004 and 12 is 16. So yeah, around age 12, as Saturn in the sky was moving around through Sagittarius, where your Moon and Pluto are, and we can zone in here a little bit more. Yeah, I would say that from the beginning of 2016, pretty much through that entire year, even on to the beginning of the following year, that there was some difficulties around in the home life, or some kind of structural change. Something went down that was not easy, that really in some ways forced you to internalize or hold a position. I think everyone in your group knows what it is except for you.
We know, so we all know.
Can you give someone permission to share any of that, because that's what we do here?
He had ran away, and then I bought a farm,
They moved off grid.
and we moved off grid. And,
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So without knowing any further details, and for the people online that couldn't hear that, there was a physical change in the home structure that in some ways, with Saturn, the planet of holding back and authority and restriction, in some ways may have felt like something was pulling you away from where it was you wanted to be or who you wanted to be. And that in some ways, whether you realized it then or not, that in some way forced you to go inward and make some sort of resolve or decision that may impact you for much of your life. that's like almost like I don't ever want to do that again, or I wouldn't do that to someone else, or whatever it is. I don't know what the dynamics are, but a pretty strong, strong period of time, I would imagine. And then the other thing that I would suggest here is that as we bring this back to now and we see that over the last couple of years, Neptune has gone over the place where your sun was, and Saturn over the next couple of years will come up to that point. I would imagine that on some level, going back a year or so, that Neptune fuzzes things out. Neptune makes it's very spiritual, it's very musical, it's very artistic, but it's also can be confusing and delusional. And so I'm suggesting, or I'm imagining that if in fact we went back to, let's say, roughly a couple of years ago, 2022-ish, that with Neptune lining up with your sun, there may have been some struggle with what am I doing? Why am I doing it? Where am I going? Who am I? However that may have played out in your real life, if it did. And I would conclude this little discussion by suggesting that as Saturn over the next couple of years gets closer to lining up with your sun, and maybe over this last year there was a bit of a break of some sort, something wouldn't give, some obstacle, and then something kind of just let go, or something changed over this past year that may have begun last March, April, May, and maybe didn't play through maybe until like early this year, in that period of time. But what I'm going to suggest is that as Saturn gets closer and closer to your sun over the next couple of years, Saturn will actually reach the degree of your sun about a year from now. And so if you project out a year from now, I see this as a time in your life where you really do need to pull and get real, get serious, take something on that will be your own creation in a direction that you want to or feel like you need to go. Hope that made a little bit of sense to you. Yeah. You don't give up a lot on the surface. You have that Libra rising that just kind of takes the course of least resistance, and and I'm not making fun of you, don't get me wrong, or even judging. I'm just saying that we're often a lot more like our charts than we would like to be, or than we think other people think. But anyhow, thank you for putting up with them and letting them talk you into giving your name. Thanks. All right, who we got next? Do we have an Emily here? Emily, what color are you? What color are you? It says here you're blue.
Oh, yeah, that is the last name.
Well, then. All right. I just believe what I read. All right. Let's take a look at Emily. E-M-I-L-Y. Oh, that didn't work at all. E-M-I-L-Y, Emily. And now we go to, this is a 7/18/83. 7/18/83. And that will be at 8:25 p.m., 8:25 p.m. And that will be in Bellingham. Whoop, that's almost right. Let's try that again. Bellingham, Bellingham. And that's going to be Wa. And Emily, have you ever done your chart? What's your deal with astrology? Interested?
Yeah, I've done a little bit of work in the chart.
And do you think you have Capricorn rising?
Yeah.
All right, then. That's a good start. So as I look at Emily's chart, the first thing that I notice is this kind of big red triangle, like a right triangle with Venus 90 degrees to Uranus, and Uranus and Jupiter. So remember I said about every 14 years, Jupiter lines up with Uranus like it will be doing, in April. Well, it was doing that in 1983. How old are you?
40 and a half.
So 14, 28, that's like the exact, if we did exact 14 years, that would be 42, I think, wouldn't it? What's 14 times 3? And so you're coming into that conjunction because Jupiter's still catching up with Uranus. But that tells me in some way you have that sense about you of making doors open wider than they normally would for someone else. And again, for those of you who are online, you can't see Emily going like this. And that makes sense. But there's something else, and that tells me because of that square, that 90-degree angle to Venus, there's something about that you hate. There's something about that, I wouldn't say hate, but because Venus in Virgo, what you like is very exacting. What you like and don't like. And I mean this from an aesthetic sense, from a sense of things that create for you a feeling of pleasure or safety, or those things which kind of, yeah, not for me. That in Virgo, Venus has the list. And if things are like, yep, nope, rules, forget it, I'm not in, And yet that is 90 degrees to this whole part of you that when you say yes, it's often cooler than you think it's going to be. Yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so that dynamic is kind of a really interesting dynamic. And do you see how I'm going there from just taking these symbols of Venus, the planet of what we like in Virgo? Virgo is the yes, no. Virgo is the binary function of the universe. Most people don't. People think Virgo is the prissy sign. Bullshit. Virgo, in fact, the reason why people think that is two reasons, and they're both wrong. First of all, Virgo is Latin for virgin, but somehow we moderners, it never dawns on us that we think a virgin is someone who doesn't have sex or has never had sex. Whereas in Greek society, a virgin was a woman who was not property of a man. Hold that thought for a minute. And because women were property of their fathers until they were sold, I don't mean sold, I mean married. Well, usually they had to pay someone to take them. That's what the dowry was. But once a woman was married, then she was property of her husband. And the two primary classes of virgins, and this sounds crazy to us moderners, were temple priestesses and prostitutes. Why? Because they could say no. Now we understand a little bit about Virgo, because Virgo is the sign that's called the critic. It's the sign that has the ability to say no. That's not okay. Oh, there's something wrong with that. If you keep doing that and it's really annoying, don't do that. That's the Virgo. That's how we think of Virgo. But really, in the body, Virgo is what happens in our intestines. You know what happens in our intestines? The body either says, this is good stuff, I want to assimilate this. Nope, and this is shit, I'm gonna just pass this along. That's the binary function of the universe, is that yes, no, yes, no. That's why Virgos are considered to be awesome critics. I have an editor who may be listening to this, if you are. Her Mars in Virgo keeps me clean because Mars is the planet of energy, and in Virgo, at her midheaven at the top of her chart, if there's something wrong with something, she'll see it. I have no planets in Virgo. Everything looks okay to me. Not completely true. Okay, but I just picked something here out of this. But the other piece in here is that Chiron, the teacher, the wounded healer, is in there. So I would imagine on some level that there's something in your life that may have created a situation that as an adult, you now externalize, project that, want to fix it either in other people or teach them, or in some way live some part of your life that has to do with helping others, that helps you feel better about those things in your life that you'll never fix, because as humans, every one of us has Chiron, which is every one of us has something that no amount of sex, drugs, rock and roll, good acid, meditation, therapy, or being in love will fix. We're humans. But Chiron, when it's magnified in a chart like this, in some way suggests that there's something here that becomes part of the largesse, part of what you offer to other people. Does that make sense on any level?
Yeah, that makes sense, like career-wise.
Then the other thing I noticed is that you were born, remember I talked earlier this evening about how in January of 2020, Saturn was aligned with Pluto, and that corresponded with the opening volley of whatever 2020 was, and that whole meltdown, and that quarantine or whatever. But when Saturn lines up with Pluto, Saturn is the planet of containment, and Pluto is the planet of nuclear meltdown. You know, and so there's something here about that part of you that contains a whole lot more controlled meltdown than people might realize unless they know you and unless they've ever seen you go through that. And we're getting what I like to call the laugh of recognition. No, that's not me. Oh my God, how the hell did you know that? No, but there's something here that's very intense, and yet it's not negative. It just fuels your furnace, if you will. I mean, as a Cancerian person with Mars in Cancer, there's a part of you that doesn't want to be seen. There's a part of you that likes working behind the scenes and doing what you do. And yet with your moon in Scorpio, interestingly enough, high in your chart also, there you hold power, but some of the power that you hold is in what you don't say and in what you don't do. And in some ways, it's that self-control that becomes what feeds the real power that you have. And with Capricorn rising, Saturn becomes a strong piece of your chart. And so the authority that you gain really has to do with the authority that you gain by learning how to manage your own crazy, whatever it is. And sounding yes, anything you want to share with? Oh, before, one other last thing is that your way out of all of this, although I would say is your Mercury, is your communication. Mercury in Leo wants to say it out loud, and that Mercury in Leo is very closely harmonized. That's the fat blue line to Uranus. And so you get to speak things that are crazy, and yet you make them part of the performance that's so real that your words actually can alter people's perceptions of what's going on. So who the hell are you, and how does any of this fit?
I don't know, but I feel seen. So.
In general, in life, or by me right now?
By you right now.
No.
What you shared, I can definitely.
I would say one last thing about your chart, and that is from a traditional standpoint, your chart may be difficult because Mars, the planet of assertion, energy, aggression, is not happy in Cancer. But this is the boys talking about the boys. Remember, astrology, as we get it, is a function of a patriarchal society. It was written by guys about guys. And Mars, as the planet of war, is also the planet of any physical expression. And in the guy's world a couple of thousand years ago, okay, maybe even this year, a functional Mars wants to conquer other nations, other people, wants to rape and pillage and show dominance. And yet Mars in Cancer, which is where your sun is soft, it's yielding, it's nurturing, it's vulnerable. It's more self-protective of home and family and those you love. It's not interested in going out and showing everyone else how tough it is. It more is like, I'm okay, but if you come in and mess with anything of mine or people around me, you don't even know what you're stepping into. And so that traditional lens doesn't necessarily work, because your chart, again, historically in ancient times would be considered to be, I hate to use this word, afflicted, because from a male perception, your chart is worthless. However, when you turn it around and you realize what it is that you have from an emotional and experiential nature, and how intense you can defend whatever you know is to be either morally or ethically or emotionally or whatever the integrity, all I can say is that other people need to step carefully, and maybe they learn that and do. Does this make sense to you a little bit?
Yeah, I know somebody who learned that lesson very.
I hope it's not me.
Yeah.
Okay, that's enough. Let's do our third chart.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you. And thank you for saying a little bit more than Preston. All right. I'm going to put the emphasis on the wrong syllable and say Monica. Where's Monica? Monica? Monica! Hi. Monica. All right. We have Monica. By the way, I always put a little SF after all of these, so I know these were soul food people that, and we have 7-10-64, 7-10-64, and 12-16 p.m., 12-16 p.m. You cut into someone's lunch. And that is Bellevue. You know what happens when you dial 911 in Bellevue? You get Nordstrom's. Sorry. In 1964, you didn't even have electricity in Bellevue. Who are you kidding? There was no bridge. You swam if you wanted to go to Seattle. What's that?
We're just trying to understand the joke.
Bellevue is the original home of Microsoft, and it's become, I think, the largest, fastest growing upper class or upper middle class part that is separate from Seattle, that kind of really began to explode once the bridge was built, and you could be 5 minutes into Seattle. Not anymore. All right. Anyhow, Monica, we have 2 Cancerians in a row. I mean, I know that Cancers like to be invisible, but that's ridiculous. Okay. All right. You moved. So Monica is another Cancer, but Monica, actually, interestingly enough, like Emily, you have Mercury in Leo. And so the Mercury in Leo is more outgoing and more communicative, but your Mercury is lined up with your moon in Leo. And Leo often is talked about as the person who wants to be on stage, the drama, the boasting, the look at me. And again, we go back to guys writing astrology, because male lions spend most of their adult life posturing to see who's top cat, because in the lion community, the alpha lion doesn't get the alpha female lioness. The alpha lion gets all the female lions in the local community. So there's a lot at stake. So male lions spend most of their life roaring and pounding their chest and boasting and playing playing football and putting other people down in the locker room and whatever Leos do. And look at me on stage, look at me, Mick Jagger, Leo, even Gemini, Paul McCartney, Leo moon, that whole Madonna, Virgo, Leo. But here we have a Cancer with Mercury lined up with the moon in Leo. And I would say that it's really important to understand that an evolved Leo, and I would say also a yin, a feminine expression of Leo, isn't necessarily about me being on stage, the center of attention, and being dramatic. What it's really about is the lioness doesn't have time for any of that bullshit. Why? Because she's raising the family. She's got to care for the cubs. She's doing the hunting. She's taking out the trash. She's keeping the books. She's making sure everything works while the guys are off drinking beer and playing, beating each other up on the football field. And so I think the real key word for that Mercury conjunct the moon in Leo is about intention. And it's about persistence of intention. And with Mercury, there's an intellectual or mental framework of wanting to be true to your feelings. I don't know if that resonates or makes sense. Absolutely is better than relatively, I think. Absolutely. And yet you have Cancer on the midheaven, as did Emily, and you have that was actually Preston had Cancer on the midheaven. Oh, we have a run on this Cancerian energy. Interesting. Anyhow, but that Cancer on the midheaven with the North Node close to the midheaven, with the sun also in Cancer, there's an emotional component here that suggests something about your mission statement in some way is about caring, is about either caring for others or about protection or about persistence of what's the word I'm looking for? That not vulnerability, but that there's a self-protection piece in there. Resilience is the word that I was looking for. And yet you're a lot more clever than it. And I'm not saying that it might seem to me, because nothing. I don't know you at all, but you have Mars and Venus lined up in Gemini, and that is the part of you that actually is curious, is diverse, that does many things, isn't content just to sit in your Cancerian shell or cave and knit or whatever, a Cancerian, what a crab might do inside a cave. But there is that piece of you that I think is important, and in some ways it becomes part of the motivating factor in whatever it is that you do as part of your healing work. And when I say your healing work, I mean both the healing you do on yourself and whatever it is that you do in relationship, whether you're a quote unquote healer or not. We are all healers and hurters, and it's just awareness makes the difference in our everyday relationships. The other thing that I would point out here is that you are just coming through your second Saturn return. And so what happened for you roughly around age 29, 30, in some ways from, let's say, March, April of last year to maybe January of this year, roughly, in some ways was like another bump of what did I do? How did it work out? How are those changes? What do I need to do now to get myself situated for what's coming up, and so on? And again, I see you shaking your head. Yes, and with all that watery Cancerian energy and a gentle Libra rising, I'm wondering if you would grace us with any feedback about what it is that I've said, how any of this works for you.
So I sold my primary residence last year in the spring, and I'm waiting to purchase a primary residence. I'm in an apartment, and what you said earlier this evening about Pluto and how the energy was really stagnant during the winter, and then the floodgates opened.
Yeah.
That's how I felt in January. That's how I felt about where I was in my life.
And what were the changes roughly around 29, 30-ish? That would have been like in 93, 4, somewhere in there, the early 90s.
In 93, my mom died. And early 90s, 1990, I became self-employed. So after working in a profession for 7-8 years already.
And what is that profession?
I'm a hairstylist.
Oh, all right. So that nerd. Okay, so there's two things here, and often, I'm always surprised by what people share of their lives, and I'm more amazed at how it fits in, because you can't make up stories as good as they are. And I used some of the key words earlier, but it never dawned on me that someone with all of that Gemini energy. Now, Gemini, I said, was clever but it's interactive, and it's also has to do with the digits. It has to, and I even use the thing of knitting because of the Gemini stuff. But in a way, doing hair has that same element of knitting or crocheting, because it's working with small things that are part of a larger. And then the moon and Mercury being the planet connected to Gemini, is at home in Gemini, that Mercury and the moon in Leo, after doing that whole disclaimer about putting on the show, but that's what you do, is you don't put on your own show, you're a Cancer. I'm just here quiet behind the scenes, but you look amazing. And Libra rising, Libra is the sign of the artist. Libra is the make it nice, find the right balance. And so cool. Thank you for sharing that and for you. So that's it. How'd we do? We do okay?
Fantastic.
Oh,
Yeah, thank you.
all right. And thank you all for those of you who are total hardcores. Now we tend to keep the baristas here way after their hours, and for that we are appreciative. But for that also we need to be appreciative by getting the hell out of here as quickly as we can without it being a fire drill. And so we're gonna do that. And I hate to say goodbye, but goodbye. Thank you all. And thank you all online. And remember, next month we will be meeting on Rick's birthday eve on Friday night, April 5th, just a couple of days before the total eclipse of the sun on the 8th. And don't forget, if you want a copy of the poem, for those of you who are online, online, you can send me an email at rlevine@stariq.com. And I will also, this whole event will be put on the YouTube channel permanently. And I will put a link in the top of the comments to a place where you can get that poem also. But business cards are there if you want to take one. If you send me an email and remind me that you were here and want a copy of the poem, fine. And I'm now going to stop talking. Thank you all for support. Okay, and don't take this wrong, internet land, but I'm unaliving you. That's what it says. There's a button here that says alive on internet, and I'm going to basically